G'day, it's fugitive Australian journalist Shane Delling from the website and YouTube channel Kangaroo Court of Australia. Now, Julian Assange has been free for a week now, so we're going to have a closer look at why he was released and how he was released, etc., because a lot of lies and misinformation are being spread. Some of the misinformation is accidental, but a lot of the lies is coming from the Labor Party who are trying to take full credit for it, especially Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Some of the Labor Party trolls on social media saying, oh, no, he didn't try and take credit. The media gave him credit and Julian Assange's lawyers gave him credit. Well, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and his government have been running a campaign backgrounding the media with lies, deception and deceit. And he did take credit because he's on video taking credit and he's published messages on social media taking credit. We'll have a look at those as well. The one fact is that Julian Assange's lawyers, Jennifer Robinson and his US lawyer, Barry Pollack, have given too much credit to the politicians. But if you ever listen to what they say, or especially Jennifer Robinson, she gave an interview on the 7:30 report on Monday. When it comes to the crunch, and she is asked about what are the two key factors or the factors that pressured the US into settling, she doesn't mention the politicians. She doesn't mention the fact that Prime Minister Anthony Albanese allegedly saved Julian Assange's life or anything like that. She mentions the fact of the court case in the UK and also the US presidential election, which is in November this year. And that's 100% consistent with what I said in the articles, a couple of articles I've published in the last week or so, and also with what Julian Assange's wife, Stella Assange, has been saying. She's been a lot more conservative in thanking the politicians, Stella Assange, but Jennifer Robinson, well, she was sort of gushing to some degree, and when she was on the steps of the court just after Julian Assange had been granted freedom. But I'll deal with that in a lot more detail later in this video. But let me make this point. Julian Assange apparently told the Prime Minister he'd saved his life. We don't know in what context he said that. It was just after Julian Assange had landed in Australia. He'd been locked up in the Ecuadorian embassy for 7 odd years and just over 5 years in a United Kingdom jail in maximum security. It was really supermax because he was only allowed out 1 hour a day apparently. So in that context, telling the Prime Minister who had paid for the plane that he'd saved his life, well, maybe he was just saying, well, you paid for the plane, that saved me life. We don't know in what context, but the reality is Anthony Albanese, what was he doing on the phone to Julian Assange? It was a PR exercise because as soon as he was finished on the phone with Julian Assange, or maybe even while he was on there, he was tweeting a picture of him being on the phone to Julian Assange and taking credit for Julian Assange's release as well. No shame, Anthony Albanese. He reminds me of Scott Morrison. He's morphed into Scott Morrison, he has. An article I published a few days ago has been proven true and correct. And I'll also add a couple other videos to this video, one of the Prime Minister taking full credit for Julian Assange's release, and also one of Jennifer Robinson on Monday, the 1st of July, 2024, where she points out the key factors for the US settling was the court case, and she also guesses that the upcoming US presidential election might have had an impact. But she doesn't mention the Australian government's pressure on the US as having an impact, or Anthony Albanese saving Julian Assange's life. Now, on Sunday the 30th of June 2024, I published an article, Stella Assange's Honesty Exposes Anthony Albanese's Lie of Taking Credit for Julian Assange's Freedom. Now, before we get into the article, I'll just put this screenshot up on the screen for you to have a read. It's from Stephen Mayne, a journalist who originally was the founder of Crikey website. And he says on the 25th of June, the day before Julian Assange was freed, he was freed in a Pacific island controlled by the US. And he says, I'm hearing Kevin Rudd deserves a lot of kudos, re the Assange outcome through his frenetic energy into it, and knew exactly which buttons to push and who to talk to stateside being the US. Now, that was the 25th of June, Tuesday the 25th of June, the day before Julian Assange landed on the Pacific island and was granted freedom, because it started hitting the media that he'd boarded a plane in the UK, and there's actually a video of that. So how would Stephen Mayne know what Kevin Rudd did or didn't do, and whether he knew which buttons to push? Who told Stephen Mayne that? Someone from the Labor Party, and it was probably Kevin Rudd himself. They're trying to take credit before even the plane had touched down on the Pacific island for Julian Assange to be released. The Australian Labor Party's PR campaign started as soon as Julian Assange was released from the UK jail, where they're trying to take credit for everything. It was all Kevin Rudd. Well, if it was all Kevin Rudd, tell us what he did. Nothing. Even Julian Assange's own lawyer, who they reference as saying that Kevin Rudd did X, Y, and Z, she can't identify anything specifically he did that led to Julian Assange's release. In fact, on Monday, the 1st of July, she talks about the court case in the UK, which is the reality of it. It was a court case that got him freed. But the point about the Stephen Mayne tweet is they're already pushing the PR campaign, the propaganda campaign, the Australian Labor Party. As soon as he stepped a foot outside of the UK jail, and before the plea deal had been approved in the US court the day after. So anyone trying to say that the Labor Party and Prime Minister Anthony Albanese didn't take credit, saying, the media gave him credit, the lawyers gave him credit. Well, no, there they are trying to take credit before anyone else gave him credit. Because someone in the Labor Party, and almost certainly it was Kevin Rudd, leaked that information to Stephen Mayne so he could post it on Twitter. Now, the article starts off, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese wins the inaugural Scott Morrison Award for shamelessly taking credit for something he had nothing to do with, for his own politically motivated self-promotion. Luckily, Julian's wife, Stella Assange, has been honest and open about the facts, or at least as much as she can at this point, and she has said enough to make it obvious to anyone who has followed the case what the real reason is for Julian being free. It is because the US knew they were going to lose the court case for Julian's appeal for extradition, set down on the 9th and 10th of July 2024. I knew and wrote about it on the Wednesday, the 26th of June 2024, before Assange finalised a deal with the US on Saipan Island, in an article titled, Why has US President Joe Biden given Julian Assange a get-out-of-jail-free card now? Which starts off, on the face of it, there are two key reasons for the US negotiating a deal and one key factor for Julian Assange accepting the deal. Firstly, the US were almost certain to lose the next court hearing in the UK for their Julian Assange extradition attempt, given the US had failed to give the UK court the assurances they asked for regarding Assange's legal rights in the US. The Sydney Morning Herald reported on Saturday, the 29th of June 2024. On Thursday, a candid briefing in Washington, D.C. revealed the thinking inside the US legal team. An email seen by the Washington Post showed the attorneys believed they were going to lose their case to extradite Assange to the US, making a plea deal a wiser choice. The urgency here has now reached a critical point, the trial attorney wrote on April 4. The case will head to appeal and we will lose. Anyone following Julian Assange's court case knew the US would lose, and the US knew it as well. And they were the ones driving the plea deal with urgency to avoid going back into court for the appeal on the 9th and 10th of July 2024. Losing in court would have caused international embarrassment for the US, given they had been pursuing Julian Assange for over 10 years, and it is the US who decided to drive the plea deal with urgency for their own benefit and solely for their own benefit. Then I have a heading, Lawyer Jennifer Robinson. A lot of people are referencing Julian Assange's lawyer, Jennifer Robinson, for thanking Prime Minister Anthony Albanese as proof Albanese actually did something to help Assange's release from jail. Jennifer Robinson did give a gushing, almost embarrassing thank you outside the court on Saipan Island on Wednesday, the 26th of June 2024, around midday, as per the below video. In the video, Jennifer Robinson thanks Prime Minister Anthony Albanese for his statesmanship, his principled leadership, and his diplomacy. And she spoke further about what he did, but gave no detail of Albanese doing anything except paying lip service. Robinson then thanked Attorney General Mark Dreyfus, Foreign Affairs Minister Penny Wong, and former Australian Prime Minister and now US Ambassador Kevin Rudd for his adept diplomacy and his relentless efforts in Washington that ensured this outcome. And Jennifer Robinson also thanked Australia's High Commissioner in London, Stephen Smith, whose tireless work enabled them to be here today. Now, I'll play that video of Jennifer Robinson outside court in Saipan Island on Wednesday, the 26th of June 2024, around midday.
I want to take this opportunity to thank the many people who have, around the world, supported Julian Assange over these years and who have supported us in defending him. There has been a global movement behind Julian to protect free speech, and it is because of that global movement of support that today's outcome is possible. I also want to take time to thank the Australian people and the Australian government. for all of the support that we've received from home in Australia. In particular, I want to thank our Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, for his statesmanship, his principled leadership and his diplomacy, which made this outcome possible. It was as Leader of the Opposition, he said, and took a stand for justice and said, enough is enough. There is nothing to be served by Julian's continued incarceration. As Prime Minister, he stood true to his word and he did what he needed to do to ensure Julian's freedom. He raised it at the highest level, at every opportunity, and when Australian officials were making outreach to the US, they knew that they were acting with the full authority of the Prime Minister of Australia. It was his intention that this be done, and we wouldn't be here today without the Prime Minister of Australia's support. So I want to thank Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. I also want to thank our Attorney General Mark Dreyfus, our Foreign Minister Penny Wong, and give particular thanks to our US Ambassador and former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd for his adept diplomacy and his relentless efforts in Washington that facilitated our negotiations with the US government and ensured this outcome. I also want to thank our High Commissioner in London, Stephen Smith, whose tireless work enabled us all to be here today.
If I was a betting person, I'd bet good money on the press statement Jennifer Robinson gave in the video you just watched, being drafted and countersigned by Kevin Rudd. It was gushing, bordering on being embarrassing and full of lies. The speech would have also been gaslighting for people who know the truth of what Albanese and his government do to whistleblowers in Australia. Given Jennifer Robinson thanks Anthony Albanese, Mark Dreyfus, Penny Wong and Kevin Rudd and Stephen Smith, I'd love to know what they actually did. They did very little except book the plane and take some happy snaps for self-promotion, which is more evidence that Kevin Rudd or someone in the government helped draft the press statement Jennifer Robinson gave in the video you just watched. Remember, the deal was only done when the US realised they would lose a court case as per the above lawyer's email quoted in the Washington Post. And the deal was negotiated between Julian Assange, his lawyers and the US government. They'd only left booking the taxi back to Australia for Albanese, Mark Dreyfus, Penny Wong, Kevin Rudd and Stephen Smith to do. The taxi being a jet rental costing $520,000 US, which Assange has to pay back to the Australian government and which he has already raised the money for. I think Jennifer Robinson didn't realise the support and goodwill afforded Julian Assange by his many supporters does not extend to Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and his government, who are well-known haters of whistleblowers. Jennifer Robinson played a huge role over 14 years getting Julian Assange freed, and I doubt she would have given much thought of any consequences of overdoing the thank yous. Now, as soon as Julian Assange arrived back in Australia on Wednesday, the 26th of June, 2024, Anthony Albanese was straight onto the phone to him. Couldn't wait, congratulated him, etc. Then he's gone straight on the social media and promoted the fact that Julian Assange is back, the fact that he spoke to him, and taking full credit for Julian Assange's return. Then not long after that, he's called a press conference where he takes full responsibility. And he says, and I'll show you the video in a second, and he says, "We have got this done." And right throughout, he's taking credit. Right at the end, he takes credit again. "Oh, this is why we need quiet diplomacy," or something like those lines. He's used the quiet diplomacy line all along, trying to make out he's actually doing something when he wasn't. Now let's watch the video of Prime Minister Anthony Albanese on that night taking full credit just a half an hour or so after Julian Assange had arrived back in Australia.
Earlier tonight, but you probably knew this, Julian Assange was reunited with his family here in Australia. His arrival home ends a long-running legal process. A plea agreement between Mr Assange and the United States Department of Justice was accepted by a US court in Saipan earlier today. I do want to express my appreciation to the United States and the United Kingdom for their efforts in making this possible. As Prime Minister, I have been very clear that regardless of what you think of his activities, Mr Assange's case had dragged on for far too long. I have clearly and consistently, at every opportunity and at every level, advocated for Mr Assange's case to be concluded. I am very pleased that this saga is over. And earlier tonight, I was pleased to speak with Mr Assange to welcome him home and had the opportunity to ask about his health and to have my first discussion with him. His safe return to Australia, we know, means so much to his family. His wife Stella, his children, who he is looking forward to playing with, like any dad, and his parents Christine and John. There are a range of views about the actions of Mr Assange. The Australian government feels strongly that the proper protection of all national security information is vital for safety. But as I have said, both as Labor leader and as Prime Minister, there was nothing to be gained by the further incarceration of Mr Assange, and we wanted him brought home. Tonight, that has happened. We have got this done. I also acknowledge the efforts of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, my ministerial colleagues, Penny Wong, the Attorney-General and others. Other Australian officials who've worked tirelessly on this case, particularly over the last couple of years. In particular, I want to thank Ambassador Rudd and High Commissioner Stephen Smith, who travelled home to Australia with Mr Assange. We'll have meetings about AUKUS and other arrangements over coming days as well. They worked with his legal team to facilitate a very smooth journey. This is the culmination of careful, patient and determined advocacy, work that I am very proud of. It is yet another example of why mature, calibrated and consistent engagement with our partners is the best way to get results in Australia's national interest.
So you can see in the video, Anthony Albanese taking full credit right throughout the video. Replay it again if you want to. He's talking about what he did and what his government did, and we have got this done, he says. What garbage. Now, I'll put a tweet up on the screen that Anthony Albanese tweeted just after he had spoken to Julian Assange on that night. And he tweeted it at 8:36 p.m. And it says, earlier tonight, I was pleased to speak to Julian Assange to welcome him home to his family in Australia. And he attaches a message below that and says, as Prime Minister, I've been clear, regardless of what you think of his activities, Mr Assange's case has dragged on for too long. I've clearly and consistently, at every opportunity and at every level, advocated for Mr Assange's case to be concluded. Then he posts another message directly under that. And they're all posted at the same time, these messages. And it says, this is the culmination of careful, patient, determined work. It is another example of why mature, calibrated and consistent engagement is the best way to get results in Australia's national interest. Now there he is again, Anthony Albanese, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, taking 100% credit for getting Julian Assange back. And that's important because a lot of the Labor trolls on social media say, no, he didn't take credit. The media gave him credit. The lawyers gave him credit. He didn't take credit. Well, that's total rot. As soon as Assange has landed in Australia, he's on social media taking 100% credit. Not long after that, he's doing a press conference saying, we got this done. Taking 100% credit. And if he wants to take credit, tell us what he did. And Anthony Albanese had his whole media team and communications team coordinating the lot right throughout the government. Let's have a look at a tweet Senator Penny Wong put on social media the following day. It says, thank you to Kevin Rudd and Stephen Smith for their careful and determined diplomatic efforts to bring Julian Assange home. Both have been instrumental in engaging with Mr Assange's legal team and the US system to conclude this matter. They booked the taxi home. That's all they did. They paid for it, and then Assange had to pay it back. And they showed up for some happy snaps. What else did they do? Now, I spoke before about Anthony Albanese's media team and communications people, backgrounding journalists where they basically feed them a story. Let's have a look at a couple of headlines in The Guardian. Now, the first one says, freedom for Julian Assange is quite a triumph for Anthony Albanese by Carol Middleton. And the headline under it says, the Prime Minister was central to paving the way for the WikiLeaks founder's release. Well, that's total bullshit. Where's the evidence of that? There is none. And another headline, relentless lobbying in a garden party ambush. How Australia pushed for Julian Assange's freedom. And below that it says, WikiLeaks founder's release was a culmination of years of behind-the-scenes diplomatic lobbying, which got a big boost when Albanese took office. Well, it's total bullshit. We know the facts. The court case in the UK is what led to the pressure being put on the United States to settle because they knew they were going to lose. So the so-called years of diplomacy didn't achieve jack shit because there virtually was none. It was just lip service. Paying a bit of lip service here, paying a bit of lip service to Jennifer Robinson. So she thinks they're actually trying to do something, which they weren't. As someone said, Anthony Albanese could have used AUKUS, the $368 billion deal, to put pressure on the US to release him, but he chose not to. Why is that? Because they didn't care. What they cared about is bad publicity they were getting and a lot of heat because they were doing nothing. They were doing nothing about Julian Assange, and while at the same time they're jailing whistleblowers like David McBride, and they're trying to jail ATO whistleblower Richard Boyle. Now back to the article. But by the next day, Jennifer Robinson, less than 24 hours after Julian Assange arrived back in Australia, let Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and the government know that Julian Assange was back in town, as per the below video I'm about to show you. In the video at Parliament House on Thursday the 27th of June 2024, Jennifer Robinson gives Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, a known whistleblower hater, the middle finger by pointing out that war crimes whistleblower David McBride's jailing is unacceptable. Now I'll play you that video.
And I think it's important that everybody continues to rally around the free speech issues that are so important in this case and continue to demand better free speech protections for journalists here in Australia and in the US and for whistleblowers. And with that, I want to make sure that we recognise David McBride, who is in prison here in Australia for having revealed information about war crimes in Afghanistan. It is unacceptable he's in prison, and I cannot stand here today to talk about free speech without mentioning him, and I know that Julian will be happy that we have. So thank you very much.
Now, Jennifer Robinson thanking the government for Assange's release from jail and raising the jailing at David McBride's at the same time would have been very embarrassing for the government. Now, the article goes on to say, Stella Assange sets the record straight and is more balanced and conservative in thanking people. In the below video at Parliament House on Thursday the 27th of June 2024, Stella Assange points out the breakthrough with negotiations with the US only came after Julian Assange had won his right to appeal, and his appeal was about to be heard in court. That is 100% consistent with what I have written above. Now, I'll play you that video of Stella Assange.
Well, here we are. I'm eternally grateful to everyone who has made this possible. In this building, the group of friends from across the political spectrum who came together on this issue. I think it's quite unique that it got people together from all sides to work towards Julian's freedom and to keep it at the top of the agenda for years now. And the results we see today, we see last night, I think the whole world celebrated with us. It was us meeting on the tarmac, but it was the entire world who was celebrating. I think it's important to recognize that this breakthrough came at a time when Julian was going to be able to air his arguments in the UK if there had been an appeal. He had been granted permission to appeal. The issue before the High Court was going to be his ability to rely on constitutional protections in the US for freedom of speech and freedom of expression. And it was only then that there was a breakthrough in the negotiations and things started moving very quickly. I think that's very telling. And if Julian pleaded guilty in a federal court in Saipan, it's because he was pleading guilty to committing journalism. This case criminalizes journalism, journalistic activity, standard journalistic activity of news gathering and publishing. And so this is the reality of this prosecution. It's the case should never have been brought, and but the important thing is that Julian is free and that he is no longer in Belmarsh prison and that the case is over and we can put this behind us. And Julian is overjoyed and so grateful to the Australian people, to the members of Parliament, and to the government and also the opposition who came together to voice the need for his release. Thank you.
And the article goes on to say, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and his government had no involvement in the court case. So how can they claim any credit with Assange's freedom, given the breakthrough was Julian being granted permission to appeal in the court case? Anthony Albanese, Penny Wong and Kevin Rudd, etc., taking credit for Julian Assange's freedom when all they did was book the taxi. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has a team of media advisors backgrounding journalists with propaganda, trying to take credit for Julian Assange's release. That is why we have seen headlines over the last few days, such as "Freedom for Julian Assange is quite a triumph for Anthony Albanese," 26th of June 2024, which starts off, "Prime Minister was central in paving the way for the WikiLeaks founder's release." The whole article is dribble and propaganda, most of which would have been given to the journalist Karen Middleton from Anthony Albanese's office, designed to promote the lie the Prime Minister was central to paving the way for the WikiLeaks founder's release. There's not one shred of evidence in the article of Albanese doing anything except paying lip service over the last few years. Now, I'm about to show you a video from Monday, the 1st of July 2024, of Julian Assange's lawyer, Jennifer Robinson, and also his US lawyer, Barry Pollock. And they give a lot of credit to the politicians, and they say this politician did this and that politician did that, and the group of politicians who visited the US, they did this and that, and they helped out a lot. But they got no evidence of them actually doing anything specific that helped, just their opinion. But when Jennifer Robinson is asked about what put the US under pressure to negotiate a deal, a plea deal, well, she points to two key things. One is the court case, which was obvious because Julian Assange was about to win it and they knew they were going to lose it. And we know that from the leaked email from the Washington Post. But she also adds in the fact that the US election is in November this year, and she surmises that potentially had an impact on pressuring the US to settle. But she doesn't mention the politicians, them pressuring the US as having an impact on the US, nor does she mention Anthony Albanese saving Julian Assange's life and how that happened and how that had an impact on the US. She only mentions the two key things, the court case and potentially the US election, and she's guessing. So she doesn't know. But the court case is the obvious one, and because of the leaked email, we know it to be factual, unless the email was dodgy. But the US haven't denied the email is dodgy, so it must be factual. So I'll play that video now.
In 2019, the US, under the Trump administration, sought Assange's extradition from the UK. Barry Pollock says the US Department of Justice was in no mood to negotiate.
After it became public that he had been charged, their position was when he gets to the United States and has his initial appearance in the Eastern District of Virginia, we'll talk to you then.
After Joe Biden was elected president, Barry Pollock saw an opportunity to negotiate.
The Biden Department of Justice had issued new guidelines on prosecuting journalists, and so I wanted to make a presentation to them why I thought under their new policy the prosecution should not proceed.
The department listened, but didn't act. But in 2022, another election result helped change the game. Just over a month after he was elected, Anthony Albanese raised Assange's case with President Biden in Madrid. Around a year later, in London, the Prime Minister acknowledged that things were moving slowly.
I know it's frustrating. I share the frustration. I can't do more than make very clear what my position is, and the US administration is certainly very aware of what the Australian government's position is.
But behind the scenes, there was movement. Jen Robinson says the Prime Minister gave her some important information.
He and I had a conversation where he said to me that they had been having conversations with the US administration and he felt that there was a deal to be done, but it had to be done by us as his lawyers.
Anthony Albanese's new ambassador in Washington, Kevin Rudd, was about to become a key player in the push to release Assange.
I then flew to Washington to meet with Kevin Rudd, our ambassador, and my US co-counsel Barry Pollock, where we briefed Ambassador Rudd about the case and talked about what this was going to take.
Kevin was very vested in this, and he worked very doggedly with both the Department of Justice and myself, trying to nudge each party to get to a resolution that was acceptable to both of us. And I think a lot of times when you have a complex negotiation like that, having a third party almost serving as a mediator to try to bring the two sides together is enormously helpful, and Kevin played that role.
But despite their efforts, the negotiations ground to a halt.
We worked on a deal for months that involved a series of misdemeanours about mishandling classified information that would have allowed us and him to enter that plea remotely and come home to Australia. The DOJ then went quiet on that, and we heard nothing for months on end.
But then a group of Australian politicians ramped up the pressure. A cross-party delegation of MPs visited Washington to meet with members of Congress and the Department of Justice.
I think they made a difference. I think the bipartisan support in Australia made a difference. And I think Prime Minister Albanese speaking out made a difference. I think it was all of those things.
And the legal case unfolding in the UK increased the pressure on the US.
Free Julian Assange, now!
In February, Julian Assange sought leave to appeal to the High Court in London. It was seen as his last roll of the dice inside the UK legal system to avoid extradition. But it was the last roll of the dice for the US as well. And as internal emails published in the Washington Post show, their own lawyers were worried. One of their trial attorneys wrote, "The case will head to appeal and we will lose." They knew the US couldn't guarantee Assange free speech protections under the First Amendment, an assurance the UK judges were asking for.
I think they were under pressure on two fronts. First was there was a very real chance that we were going to win the extradition case on this First Amendment ground because, in our view, the US could not provide a satisfactory assurance about protection under the First Amendment. But the other point that people miss too is that the US was, I think, concerned about him being extradited and having a very public Espionage Act prosecution of a journalist in an election year.
At a time one of their journalists is in jail in Russia on espionage charges.
Precisely. You have a US journalist in prison in Russia, Evan Gershkovich, and the US is trying to negotiate their release. And what is the first thing the Russian government is going to say to them? Look at what you're doing to Julian Assange.
In the lead up to the hearings, Jen Robinson says she rang Australian Attorney General Mark Dreyfus and alerted him about the weaknesses in the US case.
After my conversations with our Attorney General Mark Dreyfus in January, he went and met the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, in the United States, and I think that was significant to make clear the Australian government's position and also to set out the points that we had raised, which is you may well lose this extradition case, and this is the moment to get the deal done.
In May, two High Court judges ruled that Julian Assange could appeal on First Amendment grounds, putting even more pressure on the US to come up with a deal. Around a week before his release, the parties finally came to an agreement on a plea deal.
Until the final detail was negotiated and both sides were ready to sign a piece of paper, you never knew.
How does it feel to be a free man, Mr. Assange?
It's still sinking in that we managed to pull it off and that he's home. It's been a very long time coming.
So you've seen it there for yourself, Jennifer Robinson and lawyer Barry Pollock, thanking all the politicians, saying all the politicians did all this work and that work, but they don't specifically say they did anything. I think Jennifer Robinson says Attorney General Mark Dreyfus flew to the US after she'd backgrounded him, and she said that she felt that had an impact. But when it comes to the crunch, and she's asked what put pressure on the US to settle, she talks about the court case, which is obvious, it did, and potentially the US election. in having a high-profile espionage case for a journalist would have been embarrassing for the US, especially when they've got a journalist in the Russian jail. Now, as it turns out, on Thursday the 27th of June 2024, Mark Dreyfus, the Attorney General, was asked a question in Parliament about whistleblowers. And he lied, deceived, ducked and weaved, just showing how much they hate whistleblowers. They've done absolutely nothing for whistleblowers. And I published a video about it, so I'll show you that video now because it adds to the truth that the government don't like whistleblowers and they did nothing to help Julian Assange, or nothing that achieved anything, and they're trying to take 100% credit for it. So I'll show you that video now. G'day, it's fugitive Australian journalist Shane Dowling from the website and YouTube channel Kangaroo Court of Australia. Now, I'm about to show you a video of Federal Attorney General Mark Dreyfus lying and deceiving and ducking and weaving and misleading Parliament. The video is from Thursday the 27th of June 2024, and the person who asked the question is Federal MP Sophie Scamps, and she's from the federal seat of Mackellar, which is the northern part of Sydney. Now, Mark Dreyfus has asked a question about whistleblowers and what the government's doing in relation to whistleblowers. But what he forgets to mention is the fact that he just jailed a whistleblower, David McBride, a month ago for over 5 years with a non-parole period of 2 years and 3 months. So he's going to have to serve the 2 years and 3 months and spend another couple of years, 2.5 years or more, almost 3 years actually, on parole, dealing with a parole officer. And in September this year, ATO whistleblower Richard Boyle is facing trial. And the ATO admitted he's a whistleblower. So for Federal Attorney General to tell the Parliament they're doing all this stuff, they're working hard to protect whistleblowers, while just a month ago they jailed whistleblower David McBride for over 5 years for blowing the whistle on war crimes, and they're about to try and jail ATO whistleblower Richard Boyle in September, only a few months away. So let's watch the video of Mark Dreyfus ducking and weaving and deceiving in Parliament, and watch a couple minutes into it, Sophie Scamps has to interject, and because he's not answering the question, he's avoiding the question. So let's watch the video.
We're going to move to the member for Mackellar.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is for the Attorney General, and I'll be reading it. Integrity in our political system is hugely important to the people of Mackellar, and whistleblowers are a vital pillar of that integrity. Yet right now we have a whistleblower serving a lengthy jail term and one facing trial. Civil society is united in its call for a federal whistleblower protection authority, something the Attorney General promised before the 2019 election. Will you recommit to establishing a whistleblower protection authority in this term of government? Thank you.
Give the call to the Attorney General.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I do thank the member for Mackellar for her question. I can assure the member for Mackellar that integrity is very important to every member of our government, and I would hope that integrity is important to every member of the Australian community. Our government is committed to delivering strong, effective and accessible protections for whistleblowers. And just to remind the House of where we've got to on this, in June last year, the Parliament passed priority amendments to the Public Interest Disclosure Act, which ensured that there were immediate improvements to the public sector whistleblower scheme in place in time for the commencement of the National Anti-Corruption Commission. That set of reforms implemented 21 of the 33 recommendations of the review of the Public Interest Disclosure Act 2013 that was conducted by Mr Philip Moss, an eminent former Australian public servant, in 2016. And again, to give some context to that, these were the first significant public sector whistleblower reforms since the Public Interest Disclosure Act was first enacted by the Gillard government, a Labor government, in 2013. When we enacted the Public Interest Disclosure Act in 2013, we took the precaution of writing into that Act a statutory review. That statutory review took place because the former government didn't have a choice, and the statutory review was carried out by Mr Moss. Regrettably, the former government didn't see fit to implement a single one of those recommendations. We have implemented 21 of the recommendations.
The member for Mackellar on a point of order.
A point of order is relevance. My question was directly about the Federal Whistleblower Protection Authority. Thank you.
The Attorney General needs to remind himself of the standing orders just regarding the direct relevance provisions. I'm just going to make sure his answer is compliant with that.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The government is now progressing a second, broader stage of reforms which has included the release of a consultation paper. There has been public consultation on additional supports for public sector whistleblowers, which may include a whistleblower protection authority. There have been submissions received as part of that consultation process, and they are being used to inform the government's next steps for reform.
And there you've seen it. There's Attorney General Mark Dreyfus, who tried to take some credit for getting Julian Assange out of jail. He's lying and deceiving the Parliament in relation to the government's protection of whistleblowers. They're doing absolutely nothing. They're trying to jail whistleblowers every attempt they can get. And we should thank independent Sophie Scamps for asking that question. There's no one from the government or the opposition were ever going to ask that question. They both hate whistleblowers, the Labor Party, Liberal Party and Nationals. They hate whistleblowers like no tomorrow. It's only when you get independents in Parliament do you get these sorts of questions, trying to keep the government honest. Now, one of the reasons Julian Assange was in so much trouble is because the former Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, despised him, said he committed crimes, although she produced no evidence. She had the Australian Federal Police going over all his leaked material, trying to find stuff to try and charge him. And this is what she said back in 2010.
The Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, has condemned the actions of WikiLeaks and its founder. The federal government has established a task force to comb through the documents for national security implications. The Prime Minister says she's being briefed on the information that's been disclosed.
I absolutely condemn the placement of this information on the WikiLeaks website. It's a grossly irresponsible thing to do and an illegal thing to do.
The AFP is investigating whether any Australian laws have been broken.
So even if Prime Minister Anthony Albanese can take credit for Julian Assange's release, which he can't, although he's tried to and his government's tried to by pushing out all the propaganda and lies, even if he could take credit, well, the reality is part of the reason Julian Assange had to be saved in the first place is because he got stitched up to some degree by the former Australian Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, who's a Labor Prime Minister. And a lot of the politicians trying to take credit now, Anthony Albanese, Penny Wong, Mark Dreyfus, they were all in government back in 2010 when Julia Gillard was Prime Minister. So they need to take some credit for failing to help him back then. Now, I'll finish off with a few quick observations. The bottom line is, the next few weeks, few months, a lot more of the truth will come out. And a lot of the facts will come out, which will quash a lot of the propaganda that's been spread by the federal government in relation to Anthony Albanese and the government getting Julian Assange freed. Now, in relation to Jennifer Robinson giving gushing and almost embarrassing thank yous on the steps of a court in the Pacific, well, you've got to put it in context. Julian Assange had spent 5 years in jail, another 7 years in the Ecuadorian embassy. Jennifer Robinson had been his lawyer all that time. So a lot of relief. She would have been feeling a lot of relief. I'm sure Stephen Smith, the High Commissioner in the UK, and also Kevin Rudd, the Ambassador in Washington, would have been blowing in her hair and helping her draft thank yous. Oh, make sure you thank these people and thank those people. And so she would have gone out there and done that without any thought of the fact that the government would have used that to push their own agenda of taking credit for it. And they're trying to take credit because they're getting so much criticism in Australia for doing nothing for Julian Assange and attacking whistleblowers and jailing whistleblowers. So they're trying to take credit for it. And so she would have thought much about it. But she's done a couple of things to rectify that anyhow. Number one, when she got back to Australia, press conference in the Parliament, she's pointed out that it's unacceptable that whistleblower David McBride's in jail. That would have been embarrassing for the government. And on Monday, she's also, when questioned, she's pointed to the fact that the two key things that she believes that pressured the US government into settling was the court case in the UK where they were about to lose. And we know they were about to lose. And also potentially the US election where it would have been very embarrassing even if they had won the UK court case. It would have been very embarrassing if Julian Assange had been extradited to the US because having a court case where journalists had been charged under espionage laws and trying to jail him while at the same time they're trying to get a journalist out of jail in Russia who has also been charged with espionage laws. So she points to those two key factors. She doesn't point to the politicians putting pressure on the US government as having a key influence on the US government wanting to settle, nor does she mention anything about Kevin Rudd saving Julian Assange's life. Once again, he just touched down in Australia, Julian Assange, after 12 years basically being in jail, 5 in jail and 7 years at the Ecuadorian embassy. And he would have felt a huge relief. And the government did pay for the plane. Let's make a statement of fact. They did pay for the plane. They were making a few mumblings in public about enough is enough. They're saying enough is enough for Julian Assange. They aren't saying that for jail whistleblower David McBride or ATA whistleblower Richard Ball, but are they? And that's why it's been key to do this video and other videos I've done recently, and also the articles, to point out that the government can't take credibility, because they did bugger all, because they're trying to take credibility to some degree to camouflage the fact that they're persecuting whistleblowers. So that's why it's important to point out the fact that they did not help Julian Assange. They can't take credit for it. And they only want to take credit to boost their own PR and diminish the fact that they're persecuting whistleblowers in Australia. Make sure you visit my website, Kangaroo Court of Australia, and read that article. There's further information in the article I've published. Make sure you share this video on social media, and please hit the like and subscribe button. And Kangaroo Court of Australia is independent media. I publish a website and a YouTube channel, and I'm 100% crowdfunded from viewers like yourself. So please support my Patreon account. I currently have 429 supporters, donating $2,379 a month. And I need to almost double that to become financially viable. And you can donate any amount, $3, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30, $40, $50 a month, whatever suits your budget. It all helps out in a big way. And the link for the Patreon account will be below this video on YouTube and also on my website. Other than that, thank you for your time and have a good day.